Hi, and welcome to today's episode of pianoTV. We are going to talk about the Baroque dance suite today and go over its history in the classical music landscape. We're going to talk about the various dances that you'll find in a dance suite. A dance suite is basically just like a collection of several dances. It's usually always the same dances with like a few optional extras thrown in there. And we're going to go through each of the dances. I'll give you a listening example so you can kind of have it in your ear, and we'll talk about some of the additional dances as well. This video is meant to be like a bird's eye view of the dance suite, so we're not going to get like really crazy into depth, but what I do plan on doing in the future is going into each of these individual dances in more depth in the future, kind of like how I've already done with the minuet. If you want to check that out, I've already done like a, short-ish video on what a minuet is. But anyway, this video should give you a sense of what a Baroque dance suite is, and it should help you get perspective if you're learning. Basically, anytime you learn Baroque music, you're inevitably going to come across music from a dance suite. Even if you're new, like a lot of early level music is still music from a dance suite. Like if you're learning a minuet, it might be an isolated minuet, but it might be a minuet in a dance suite. Anyway, let's get started. Dance suites started in the late 1300s, where musicians would pair a couple of dance tunes back to back, but it eventually expanded to include 5 dances by the early 16th century, which is the Renaissance era. These dance pieces are related by key and sound, so that's how they all kind of sound unified together. So for example, if one piece is a dance suite in D minor, all the other pieces in that dance suite are also going to be in D minor. The dance suite was one of the main musical genres of the Baroque era, but sometimes you can have dance suites that are under different titles, such as a partitia or an overture, and it's the same kind of thing, just with a different name. As I mentioned earlier, the dance suite is such an important and popular part of Baroque music that you're bound to come across it at some point in your musical studies, which is why I think it's so important to learn about it. Originally, dance suites were meant for dancing. This would have been like in the Renaissance, and the individual movements within them would have been for dancing. However, in the Baroque era, they evolved off of the dance floor and people just started listening to them instead. And what this did is it gave composers more liberty to create more complex music that just wouldn't be very practical to dance to. So dance suites started functional and then eventually became more elaborate and became just for listening. By the end of the Baroque era into the early classical era, the dance suite fell out of fashion. It became like uncool, and that's where you saw the rise of other different types of genres like the symphony and the sonata. In the early Baroque period, Johann Jacob Froberger is the man credited with establishing the standard dance suite of the allemande, courante, sarabande, and gig. His suites, which were written in the 1600s, were really popular, and they then went on to influence composers such as Bach. Each of these 4 dances are related to a different country, so they each have their own unique style. So the allemande is German in origin, courante is French, sarabande Spanish, and gig is English. As the dance suite genre evolved throughout the Baroque era, more movements were sometimes added to it. So for example, a composer could add one of the following between a sarabande and a gig. They could add a minuet, a gavotte, a passipide, or a bourrée. Also, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing any of these words. Please let me know if I am. I often, these are words that I tend to just read and not say. So if I'm saying them wrong, it's probably good to know. Later in the Baroque era, composers like Telemann and Handel and Bach composed overture suites, which is just a dance suite, like everything we have on the screen here, with an overture at the beginning, which is kind of like an introduction. There are some famous suites by Bach and Handel that you might want to go and check out if you're getting into this. Like I said, we will give you audio clips to listen to of each of the individual dances, but if you want to listen to a full version, Bach's French suites and English suites and partitias all for keyboard are definitely worth listening to, but he also wrote a lot of dance suites for other instruments like the flute and the violin and so on. Handel has a couple really famous ones. He has water music and he has music for the royal fireworks. Both are excellent, and you've probably heard a couple individual movements from them already. By the end of the Baroque era, which is around 1750 or so, suites became old hat and they fell to the wayside in favor of new and stylish genres of the moment, like the symphony, which was one of the main genres of the classical era. But suites have had somewhat of a modern comeback, with romantic and modern composers doing their own take of them. So there's a lot of good examples of this, but we have Grieg's Peer Gynt Suite, which is Romantic era. You have another Romantic era, Nutcracker Ballet by Tchaikovsky. And then you have guys like Debussy, who wrote Suite Bergamasque, which is an Impressionist example. And Ravel composed his Mirrors Suites, both of which were for the piano. A typical Baroque dance suite might look something like this. So some of the times you have an opening with a French overture, which is just a slow introduction. It's not mandatory. These are the core 4 dances that you will see in a Baroque suite: the Allemande, Courante, Sarabande, and Gig. We already talked about those. These 4 dances are very symmetrical in their time signature. So if we ignore the overture for a moment, the time signatures of each of the 4 dances go 4/4, then 3/4, 3/4, then 4/4, very rounded. And then the tempos, you'll notice, also provide some contrast between the dances. We have a medium one, which is the Allemande, fast one, which is Courante, that is supposed to say slow, not flow. But slow music flows, I don't know. And then the Gig is quite fast. These core 4 dances were written in one of the simplest forms, which is binary form. We actually did a whole video on this a while ago, if you want to check that out. The overture, or prelude, since it's kind of like an introduction, usually has a free form improv feel to it, which is a nice contrast when placed next to all of the structured dance pieces. There were also some optional dance movements that a composer might add between the Sarabande and Gig, which would be, we have a gavotte, we have a bourrée, a minuet, passepide, and a rigadoon. These optional extra dances were generally written in ternary form, which is three-part form. So binary means by 2-part, which you would usually see represented as A-B form. So there's part 1, A, part 2, B. Whereas ternary form is very, very similar. Instead of ending at B, we just go back to A. So it's kind of like you have section 1, A, section 2, B, and then sort of a return to section 1 again. The opening overture, or French overture, was a popular way to open a dance suite in the Baroque era. So some of its defining features are, they are in 2 distinct sections, so binary. Section 1 has a lot of slow dotted rhythms, and then section 2 is faster and fugal, which just means there's multiple melodies. The overture was first found in Jean-Baptiste Lully's overtures from the early Baroque era, and we'll listen to an example of one of those in a moment. But there are other famous overtures that you can find in some of Bach's suites, like, say, for example, his orchestral suites, his Partitia in D major, and so on. The overture was also used as an opening to operas and oratorios. There's a notable example by Handel, his oratorio Messiah. So let's take a quick peek at the overture from Lully's Le Bourgeois Gentilhomme. So you can hear, I don't know why I said it in that voice. That's my way to like fake a terrible accent. But then you can hear the, one thing that you hear in French overtures is like a kind of like a slow dotted rhythm, which gives it a little bit of a lilting sound. And that's what I want you to listen for. So let's take a listen. The German Allemands, first in the set of a standard dance suite, originated in the Renaissance era, like most of these, and was one of the most popular instrumental dances in the Baroque era. So the 3 main features of an Allemande are that the tempo is moderate, it's not super fast, but I would say it's like a little more on the fast side than the slow side. It's usually in 4/4 time, or something simple like that. And the mood of it is serious. It's usually a very like dignified type of dance. It doesn't have like a sense of fun. It's just, yeah, it's very serious. So let's take a quick listen to an Allemande by Handel, so you can get a feel for the sound of it. The courant is the second dance in a Baroque suite and has its origins in the late Renaissance from France and Italy. So courant literally means running, and the way it was danced originally was with fast and running steps. Now, I mean, for the most part, these courants and stuff written by Bach weren't meant to be danced to, but that was kind of its origin. So some common features of it include the time signatures, usually in threes, whether that be 3/2, 3/4. The character is fast and lively, and it's got like a sweet character to it. So where the Allemande is very serious, the courant tends to be a little bit more emotional, pleasant. So I want you to take a listen to the solo flute courant by Bach from his Partition for solo flute, and you can hear that more lighthearted character. The sarabande is the third dance in a Baroque suite, and it's the slowest movement. Its origins are Spanish, possibly Central American, and became popular in Italy and France in the 1600s. So some common features of this dance includes the meter, so it's usually in 3/4 time. It's usually very slow, and they tend to have like a halting sound due to how they kind of emphasize the second beat. Almost, I don't want to say it almost has a dotted sound. That's not the correct way to look at it, but it's got a little bit of a lilt to it regardless. So let's take a listen to the same solo flute partition by Bach, this time the sarabande, from the same partition. The gig, or jig, is the last movement of a typical dance suite. It's English in origin, but it was imported to France in the Renaissance and Baroque eras, where it became really popular. So some features of the jig are its compound time. So instead of being in 4, it's going to be like 3/8 or 6/8. It's fast and lively, usually really fun, and it's got... Oftentimes it has a contrapuntal texture, which just means that it's got like more than one melody playing at the same time, which gives it, it's a very common Baroque thing to do. So let's take a quick listen to Bach's gig from his cello suite number 1 in G major. Really quickly run through some of the various dances that might be found sandwiched between the main 3rd and 4th dance movements, so like the sarabande and gig. The first that you might find in between there would be a gavotte. Some common features of a gavotte is that they're in 4/4 time. It's originally French. They've got like a steady and moderate rhythm, usually like a little bit on the fast side, and they sometimes have a 2-beat upbeat, which just means that it doesn't start right on beat 1. It starts like halfway through the bar. Another optional and fairly common dance is the Baroque, which is usually in half time, 2/2 time, sorry. French origin. It's actually pretty similar to the gavotte. One difference I find with these ones is that they're a little bit quicker, and they usually just have a 1-beat upbeat. So what that means is instead of starting on beat 1, it's going to start right before the bar. It's going to start usually on beat 4. Let's listen to a really quick example. This is the only one of the optional dances I'm going to show you an example for, just for the sake of expediency, and we'll elaborate on these videos in good time in the future. But I do want to show you a Baroque. This one's again by Bach from his lute suite number 1 in E minor. talked about a minuet in depth on this channel before. It's one of the few Baroque dances that we've gone in depth on. So you can check that out. We'll link to it in the blog and below. But just really quickly, here's some of the musical features of this super popular dance. Well, one of them is that it's one of the most popular Baroque dances. Minuets are in triple meter, so usually things like 3/4. And some suites will have 2 minuets played back to back, so like a minuet 1 and a minuet 2. They're French in origin, and they have a simple, moderate rhythm. The rhythm's usually really uncomplicated in these, and they're usually not too fast. They tend to border on the slower side of moderate. Then we have the passapied, which is in triple meter, so usually you'll see this in 3/8. Like many of these, it's French in origin. It's a pretty fast dance. And just like the minuet, you'll have sometimes 2 of these played back to back in a dance suite. So you have passapied 1 and 2. And finally, we have the rigadoon, which is, again, French in origin. It's got duple meter, which usually means like 2/4 or 2/2. It's also, I find this to be pretty similar to the bourrée, just maybe a little bit simpler. Bourrées can sometimes be a little bit more elaborate. And that is all for today's bird's eye perspective view on a Baroque dance suite. Hopefully this has given you a little bit more insight. And then the next time that you're learning like an allemande or something, you can go and see what collection it's from, and maybe it is from an actual like full-blown dance suite that you can then go and check out. So thank you so much for watching this video. Give it a like if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you haven't already, and you can come visit me on social. I exist on Instagram is where I'm usually the most active, but still not very active. I'm not like a I don't know. I'm not one of those who posts like 10 times a day. But yeah, you can come visit me on Facebook and Twitter too. I exist over on those parts, and I will catch you in the next video. Ravel composed mirrors, Ravel composed mirrors, miroir. Why can't I say this?